Okay, so here we go. Polar system. A point P in the polar coordinate system is represented by an ordered pair of numbers r theta. R is the radius, like r always represents, and theta is, of course, the angle. So here we have an example of the basic polar system. The pole is like the origin. Okay, that's just the name in the polar system, but that's like your traditional origin. The polar axis is always the positive x-axis, so it's consistent with all that we have been doing so far. Our angles will always be measured from that polar axis, which you can consider it's equivalent to the positive x-axis. So when you've got theta right here, r is the length of that segment. And so then your point out here corresponds to that length and that angle. Okay, so we can use the polar system with radians. We can also use it with degrees. So you'll see on that piece of paper that I gave you, one of the coordinate axes is with degrees, one of them is with radians. So let's plot this first point, 2 pi over 3. So all you need to do is you need to find the pi over 3 angle there on your coordinate plane in the polar system. And then we're going to notice that there are numbers labeled right here on the polar axis that corresponds to a radius of 1, a radius of 2, 3, 4, etc. So you find the radius of 2 and you just plot your point on that. Those are concentric circles that have the same center, the pole. You just plot the point right there on the segment with that angle. Okay, the second example that we've got there, -1, 3 pi over 4. So 3 pi over 4, our graph is not labeled with pi over 4 angles on it, but does it look similar to something that we've used before? It looks very much like the unit circle, right? So we know that our pi over 4 angles are right here in between our pi over 3 and pi over 6. So 3 pi over 4 is right here in the second quadrant. Okay, but here's what you do when the radius is negative. You are going to go through the pole. You're going to stay on that line, but you're going to go through the pole to the other side. So that point, -1, 3 pi over 4, actually graphs on the segment that represents 7 pi over 4. Okay, so you start at 3 pi over 4, but because you have a negative radius, you go through the pole, stay on that line, and graph it on the other side. Okay, so that makes you go through the pole. And there's a negative radius. Now, if there's a negative angle, you can look at that one of two ways. Remember, a negative angle just means that you rotate clockwise as opposed to counterclockwise. So -45 degrees would be right there between 330 and 300, and it has a radius of 3. Or remember kind of the shortcut that I showed you when we were doing the unit circle. If it's -45 degrees, you find the positive angle and you either go directly below it or directly above it, depending on whether you're above or below the x-axis. So if we go directly below the 45 right here, we end up in the same place where we just graphed it. Okay, so you can use that hint as well. Okay, so the negative angle doesn't make you go through the pole. The negative angle is just, do I rotate clockwise or counterclockwise? Okay, any questions about plotting points? Questions about plotting points? Okay, let's do a little thinking exercise here before I show you